northern parts of Iran. The wetter weather, the snow having cleared away by this stage. The odd shower possible over the Hejaz Mountains, but essentially it's a dry story on Tuesday. Sunshine across the board, really. Temperature still about 15 degrees there in Riyadh. Now moving into South Asia, probably not quite as cold by this stage across northern plains of India, and probably not quite as much fog either. The wetter weather should have cleared away from Afghanistan and northern parts of Pakistan by Tuesday, so sunny skies pretty much. But we will see one or two showers there heading perhaps into Sri Lanka. And cold air remains the story across much of China, having swept across the Korean Peninsula, and some cold winds still across Japan. Coming in behind this band of wet weather here, it's coming into Luzon, into the South China Sea. A few showers across Indochina. Most of the downpours, though, certainly around Indonesia and southwards across Australia. Now, it is the wet season, the wet time of the year across the Northern Territories, northern parts of Queensland, but we've already had a month's rain in the top-end city of Darwin in just the space of a couple of days or so. Very wet still here on Tuesday. These bands of rain, though, are bringing significant change across the south. The heat giving way and temperatures significantly lower in Melbourne. Still a few thunderstorms, though, perhaps heading up towards Canberra and eventually into Sydney, where it's still very warm. Temperatures here 29 degrees, could get up to 30 degrees in Christchurch. Much of New Zealand basking in dry weather and some sunshine. Just one or two showers, perhaps inland across the North Island. As ever, you can get more online.
Would you trust a flying taxi?
We are at the very ground level of an entirely new part of the aviation business.
How about a plane with no pilot and no jet fuel engine?
A significant percentage of aircraft emergencies are caused by human error. By having the computers take over, you can actually further increase the safety.
An aerospace revolution is coming.
It's going to change the way we live.
New technologies are promising cleaner, greener aviation.
The drive to contribute to the environmental considerations is huge.
And more affordable flights.
It's a market expansion to making aviation more accessible.
But will it be possible to win over consumers?
What I'm really excited about, though, is making aviation personal, achieving that dream of the flying car.
Meet the disruptors of aerospace.
We're revolutionizing the business, the industry, the world.
Discover now at bbc.com/The Disruptors.
Welcome to Newsday. I'm Sharon Jutlail in Singapore. The headlines. A crisis for cryptocurrencies. One of Japan's biggest exchanges refunds $500 million after a major hacking attack.
My total losses are about 1 million yen. I was shocked. I'm finding it difficult to trust virtual currencies anymore.
The Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny is among dozens arrested during countrywide protests.
I'm Babita Sharma in London, also in the programme. Thousands take to the streets in Hong Kong to back a pro-democracy activist barred from a forthcoming by-election. And the issue of sexual harassment will take centre stage at the Grammy Awards. We're in New York with the latest.
Live from our studios in Singapore and London. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Well, good morning. It's 8 a.m. here in Singapore, midnight in London, and 9 a.m. in Japan, where there's new doubt surrounding the security of cryptocurrency exchanges, which handle digital cash systems like Bitcoin. And one of the country's biggest exchanges, Coincheck, has offered to refund $500 million in currency stolen by hackers on Friday. Japan is one of the most enthusiastic traders in cryptocurrencies, and the theft has cast doubt over the credibility of the exchange system. Audrey Davis has this report, which contains some flash photography.
As many as 10,000 businesses in Japan are said to accept cryptocurrencies. This virtual heist is bound to increase concerns about their security. At the centre of this, Tokyo-based Coincheck, one of the largest digital currency exchanges in Japan. It said on Friday it had been hacked, resulting in the loss of $500 million, the biggest ever.
There are some troubles in one of our systems. I am sorry for causing much trouble to clients and relevant parties.
Cryptocurrencies don't have a centralised register. Their strength, in theory, comes from having a connected, distributed register called a blockchain. A transaction is ordered by putting the currency into groups called blocks, which link to and verify the previous block. The stolen Coincheck assets were said to be kept in a hot wallet, which is part of the exchange connected to the internet, as opposed to a cold wallet, where funds are stored securely offline. Coincheck said it will issue full refunds to all of the 250,000 of its users who have become victims of the hack. But will that be enough?
My total losses are about 1 million yen. I was shocked. I'm finding it difficult to trust virtual currencies anymore. Others probably will no longer invest in them.
Money cannot be kept in insecure places. I won't consider investing unless there's a reliable platform providing such services.
World leaders meeting in Davos last week issued fresh warnings about the dangers of cryptocurrencies, suggesting they risked being used for illicit activity. Will the Coincheck theft now prompt regulators to act? Rodri Davis, BBC News.
Well, stay with us, as in a few minutes we'll be hearing from Jeff McDonnell. He's the Vice President of NAME, which is the name of the cryptocurrency that was stolen.
Our other top story this sounds, several thousand people have taken to the streets in Hong Kong to protest against the disqualification of a young pro-democracy activist, Agnes Chow. This is all to do with her being withdrawn from a forthcoming by-election. Her candidacy was rejected because of her party and their support for self-determination for Hong Kong. Ms Chow said there was no doubt about the government's motives.
The government's move to disqualify me is telling the world and all the people of Hong Kong that we are not allowed to vote according to our free will. We can only choose candidates that the regime favours. We can only choose people that the regime accepts. This is not an election.
Also this hour, at least 10 people have been killed and dozens injured during heavy fighting in the Yemeni port city of Aden. It follows clashes between separatists who want independence for South Yemen and forces loyal to the Saudi-backed government. The Yemeni government has called for a ceasefire and has urged Arab allies to intervene. A day of mourning has been held in the Afghan capital of Kabul for more than 100 people killed in Saturday's bomb attack. Funerals have been taking place and relatives have been searching hospitals for survivors. The attack, using an ambulance packed with explosives, was the worst to hit the city in months. The BBC's Secunda Kumani is in Kabul.
Kabul was at one stage one of the safer places in Afghanistan. Now it seems after a repeated series of attacks in the city over the past year, it's actually one of the most dangerous places. Both the Taliban and the Islamic State group appear to be deliberately targeting the city now, whereas before they perhaps tried to capture rural territories from government forces. They know that attacks here in the city capture more international attention and also undermine the government. The security forces here say they're doing the best they can in the circumstances, but public anger at the authorities' failure to prevent this attack is rising.
Prosecutors in Cambodia have charged 10 foreigners with producing pornographic images after raiding a villa in the northwestern town of Siem Reap. They were arrested on Thursday after images emerged of people apparently imitating sexual positions at a party. However, several people in the pictures from the party do not appear among those held, according to reports. Voters in Finland have comfortably returned President Sauli Niinistö to a second 6-year term. Expressing surprise at the extent of the win, Mr. Niinistö said he must think hard about how to be worthy of the support he got. He won popularity in part by balancing the European Union's chilly stance towards Russia while maintaining good relations with Moscow. He's got a big smile, he was quite emotional, and he did it. He's pretty unstoppable. Roger Federer has won the Australian Open in Melbourne for the 6th time, thereby becoming the first man to secure 20 Grand Slam titles. The Swiss tennis star beat Marin Cilic from Croatia in 5 sets, and after the match, he was very emotional, saying that his fairy tale continues. We've got more on his win on that match in Australia in Sport Today later.
Well, let's return to our top story now. And one of the largest in Japan, the digital currency exchanges, says it will refund most of the $500 million worth of currency virtual assets stolen in a hacking attack. NEEM is the name of the cryptocurrency that was stolen, and Jeff McDonald is the vice president of NEEM. I spoke to him earlier from Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Initially, when the news came out, there was a market decline, but since that time, it's recovered. This is mainly because the tracking of the stolen funds have been able to be identified on the blockchain, and none of them have been sold.
You're saying to some extent the blame lies with Coincheck for not using the inbuilt security provided. We know, though, that despite these new regulations that the Japanese have put in place, this isn't the first time this has happened in Japan. We had a very similar incident in 2014. So surely this is giving investors very little confidence in investing in cryptocurrencies like yours.
Yes, blockchain is still a very new technology, and everybody is still learning how to implement it correctly. In time, it will definitely be updated. And we have a new update on NIM that will be able to prevent this type of thing in the future.
All right, but as you say, people are still learning, and yet people are putting a lot of money into these virtual assets. So surely, by nature, it is volatile, it is vulnerable. When will it get better, and what would you advise investors to do?
All investors should invest with caution, and it's definitely a good idea to not keep their funds on an exchange. There's something called hardware wallets, which are very secure, or using cold wallets. If Coincheck had done either of these things, the funds would have been secured.
That was Jeff McDonald, their vice president of the cryptocurrency NEM, speaking a little earlier to Sharon Jit. There's plenty more, by the way, on cryptocurrency, what it's all about on the BBC News website. Now, thousands of people have demonstrated in cities across Russia in support of calls by the opposition leader Alexei Navalny for a boycott of the presidential election in March. Police in Moscow detained him as he took part in a rally in the centre of the city. He's now been released without charge. Steve Rosenberg was at the protests and witnessed Mr. Navalny's arrest.
It isn't easy taking on the Kremlin. Alexei Navalny has been jailed 3 times in the last year. He's been barred from the upcoming presidential election. So today, Mr. Navalny called his supporters onto the streets.
Alexei Navalny is Russia's most prominent opposition figure and President Putin's most vocal critic. He's been barred from running in the presidential election. He's now being arrested by police.
This was no softly. We saw Mr. Navalny surrounded by police. Seconds later, he was thrown onto the ground. Then, the politician Vladimir Putin cannot bring himself to mention by name, was dragged into the police bus. His supporters called on voters to boycott the election. All the candidates, they believe, are hand-picked by the Kremlin.
They are candidates that Putin approved, and we do not have candidates that we want to have.
There's little doubt that Vladimir Putin will walk this election, with the help of Russian TV, which maintains his macho image, portraying him as a cross between action man and father of the nation. And Mr. Putin enjoys far more airtime than any of the other candidates. But the Kremlin still needs people to come out and vote for Vladimir Putin. That's why calls to boycott the elections are making the Russian authorities nervous. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
And you're watching Newsday on the BBC. Still to come on the programme, the father of the flat pack, IKEA's founder, dies at the age of 91.
Also on the programme, We're in New York for the Grammy Awards. It's the biggest night of the year for the music industry.
The shuttle Challenger exploded soon after liftoff. There were 7 astronauts on board, one of them a woman schoolteacher. All of them are believed to have been killed.
By the evening, Tahrir Square, the heart of official Cairo, was in the hands of the demonstrators. They were using the word revolution.
The earthquake singled out buildings and brought them down in seconds. Tonight, the search for any survivors has an increasing desperation about it as the hours pass.
The new government is firmly in control of the entire Republic of Uganda.
Moscow got its first taste of Western fast food as McDonald's opened their biggest restaurant in Pushkin Square. But the hundreds of Muscovites who queued up today won't find it cheap, with a Big Mac costing half the day's wages for the average Russian.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Sharon Jeet-Leal in Singapore.
I'm Babita Sharma here in London. Thanks for joining us. Our top stories for you this hour. One of Japan's biggest cryptocurrency exchanges refunds $500 million after a hacking attack.
And thousands rally in support of the Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, who's been released after being detained by police in Moscow. And New York's chief prosecutor says the state is opening an investigation into a firm that allegedly sold millions of fake followers to social media users. The company, Devumi, stands accused of stealing real people's identities, which it denies. That's a story that's popular on BBC.com. Well, let's take a look now at some of the front pages from around the world. The Japan Times, it's amongst the number of papers to feature improving ties between Tokyo and China. And it, of course, carried the photo that you just saw of the two countries' foreign ministers ahead of a 2-hour meeting in Beijing. The pair agreed to resume reciprocal visits by their leaders as part of a push to improve relations between Asia's two biggest economies. We can go now to the Financial Times, which reports that former UK Prime Minister David Cameron is struggling to get his $1 billion UK-China investment fund off the ground. And the paper says with tensions rising between the two countries over Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative, banks now are really reluctant to try to get involved. Now, the front page of the South China Morning Post is dominated by a picture of a 450-kilo bomb successfully defused by a Hong Kong disposable team at the construction site in Wan Chai. Now, the paper says, had the powerful device actually gone off, shrapnel could have been sent flying up to 2 kilometres. And that brings you up to date with some of the papers. Babita, what are some stories sparking discussions online?
Well, Sharon, it's all about a wild elephant in China, southwest China, in fact, that's doing the rounds on social media after, have a look, he's going for a bit of a stroll by himself, unattended, along the border into neighbouring Laos. Now, the animal neatly evaded the barrier that separates the two frontiers before coming back a couple of hours later to return home. Now, even if you've never been to IKEA, you've probably heard of the Swedish retail giant that's now a global brand. The man who founded it and revolutionised the furniture industry, Ingvar Kamprad, has died at the age of 91 at his home in southern Sweden. Our business correspondent, Joe Lynham, reports.
Ingvar Kamprad can safely be described as a retailing genius. Born in 1926 in southern Sweden, he started selling matches aged 5, then seeds, and then pencils. At 17, he formed IKEA, named after his own initials and the area where he was born. Now it's probably the best-known furniture store in the world, with more than 400 giant shops and annual sales of £30 billion. Kamprad was inspired to create the idea of flat-packed furniture when watching someone remove the legs off a table to fit into a customer's car. He disowned his previous support for far-right parties in Sweden during the war and lived a modest lifestyle. His house and possessions did not reflect his wealth.
I don't think I'm wearing anything that I haven't bought at a flea market. That's because I want to give a good example. If we're going to be conscious about our economy, one can't just talk about it, one has to show that.
The genius of Ingvar Kamprad was to persuade millions of people to come to his giant superstores, pick out products that they may like but not necessarily need, and then collect it in person from the warehouse. And crucially, assemble the whole thing at home. We're used to it now, but at the time it was laughed at. And today, one famous designer tipped his hat at what Ingvar Kamprad had achieved.
He actually tapped into the taste that every ordinary person wanted, so they could get this new wave of modernity that was coming about in the 1950s, and he managed to actually trap it and make it available to everybody.
IKEA said that Ingvar Kamprad, who was involved with the business right up until recently, would be much missed by his family and warmly remembered by the company's employees worldwide.
Ingvar Kamprad there, dead at 91. Well, a French climber stranded on one of Pakistan's highest peaks has been flown to hospital after a rescue operation, but the search for her Polish climbing partner has been abandoned. Elizabeth Revol and Tomek Maskiewicz were in northern Pakistan on Friday. They were attempting to scale Nanga Parbat, also known as the Killer Mountain, when they became stuck, as Tim Pattinson reports.
A dramatic rescue operation on one of the world's highest and most deadly mountains. An elite climbing team was rushed to the rescue after 2 climbers became stranded. As part of this daring high-altitude mission, the team was dropped more than 1,000 meters below the lost climbers' last known position. They scaled the mountain overnight, eventually finding the French climber Elizabeth Revol alive. A friend and fellow mountaineer described the rescue attempt.
They started their very heroic and extraordinarily fast 7-hour climb towards her. She was able to start moving, and that's what perhaps saved her, because had she stayed where she was, it's uncertain at all whether they would have been able to reach her in time.
Elizabeth Revol has now arrived in the capital, Islamabad, and is being treated for frostbite, but the whereabouts of her climbing partner remain unknown. Tomek Maskiewicz had become separated. He was reportedly suffering from frostbite and snow blindness. Now the search has been called off due to bad weather and treacherous conditions. Tim Pattinson, BBC News.
It is one of the biggest nights of the year for the music industry, the Grammy Awards. There will, of course, be lots of performances, including Sir Elton John, who's set to duet with Miley Cyrus. Now, in the past, the Grammys has been criticised of racial bias against black artists. This year, it's sexual harassment that's on centre stage as singers plan to wear a white rose in solidarity with the Time's Up Me Too movement. Earlier, I spoke to Neda Twafik, who had more from the red carpet in New York.
Welcome to the red carpet here at the 60th Annual Grammy Awards. And just like some of the other big award ceremonies we've seen this year, the Me Too movement is having its time at the Grammys. We've seen men and women wearing white roses, and it's really a gesture that was the idea of a newly formed group called Voices in Entertainment. And they really wanted the music industry to stand with victims of sexual abuse as well. I spoke to several celebrities on the carpet and musicians, one of which was Cyndi Lauper, who was here, and she wore a white rose, and she said it was very important that women feel safe in workspaces because that's not the case at the moment. She talked about equal pay, equal protection, standing with survivors, and she's actually going to be performing alongside Kesha tonight. Kesha has been in a long legal battle after accusing her former producer, Dr. Luke, of sexual assault. He's denied that, but she has produced a powerful song called Prayer, and she's going to be performing that at the Grammys, and it's seen as a direct message to him.
Who's expected to triumph? Who are the big winners, hotly tipped to be, that are going to be walking away with these awards?
Well, this list of nominees this year among the biggest awards are really dominated by diverse artists, and actually rap and hip-hop is finally having its time at the Grammys. So for Album of the Year, many expect either Jay-Z or Kendrick Lamar to take the big award. Both of those those artists in the past have, been critical that the Grammys hasn't really respected rap's contribution to culture and the music industry, and so they're expected to take that big prize. Luis Fonso and Daddy Yankee for this year's hit Despacito, they could take home a Grammy as well, and so it'll just be a long night filled with fabulous performances, because it wouldn't be the Grammys without the eye-catching and dramatic performances from such a long list of diverse artists from this past year.
And it actually starts in about 8 minutes' time, so we will bring you the winners of the night of the Grammys here, of course, on Newsday, so stay with us for that. Now, from the world of music, Sharon, it's the world of books.
That's right, Babita. I don't know about you, but I've got lots of favourite kinds of books. I read a lot of literary fiction and a lot of magical realism too. But actually, science fiction is well up there. And it's certainly the kind of writing that's taken off in China, with 2 Chinese writers receiving the prestigious Hugo Award in the last few years. Hao Zhengfang was the first Chinese woman to actually win a prize for her book, Folding Beijing, and she was amongst the celebrated authors to be invited to the World Economic Forum in Davos. We caught up with her there to talk about her latest novel and how modern Chinese society has influenced her work.
My story that winning the award is called Folding Beijing, and it's about a future city in the era of artificial intelligence and automation, with robots replacing a lot of people's jobs. And so there are a lot of people that are low paid without decent jobs. So I just made this kind of arrangement for that future government to deal with the problem of unemployment. So it's kind of a dark possibility of the future. I wrote stories that happen in China, but a lot of them are problems facing by all societies and economies, especially when we face the progress of technology. These are just permanent issues facing by human beings. I sometimes do this kind of mental experiment in my head, and then they turn into some science fiction story. In physics, we can do experiment in reality, but in real life, you cannot do experiment for a society. You cannot put a society in a vacuum and make distortions of it. But in a story, you can do it. Science fictions are only popular among the university students or some young workers. It's getting more and more popular. However, it is still a small circle thing, or comparing to all those other genres such as kung fu and and all those love stories. These are the most popular ones.
Hao Jingfeng there, talking about what inspires her. Well, you've been watching Newsday. Stay with us, because coming up, we'll be taking a look at whether playing it safe is holding you back. We'll be going to some tech entrepreneurs in Taipei who are going against the culture of playing it safe by encouraging people to strike it out on their own.
And I'm Babita Sharma in London. Before we go, we'll leave you with these pictures. In Switzerland for the 40th International Hot Air Balloon Festival, the 9-day event draws hundreds of hot air balloons as well as pilots from around 20 countries. We'll be back. See you soon.
Hello there. Things have turned significantly drier across France during the weekend, but the risk of flooding has not yet receded because river levels are so high. Despite high pressure continuing to bring dry weather on Monday, there are likely to be further flooding problems. Some wet weather sliding its way southwards across the British Isles, a heavy burst of rain to come, and then behind it, something cooler digging in from the north. Some of that wet weather also pushing across the south of Scandinavia and towards the Baltic states, but bringing some mild air as well. 9 degrees there in Warsaw. Still some strong winds down towards the southeast of Spain and Gibraltar, but the showers of the last couple of days tending to fade away. A lot of cloud across France, some drizzly bits and pieces of rain. Mild, 11 degrees there in Paris. There's the heavy rain pushing across the south of the UK, also into the Low Countries and northern Germany. Ahead of that, mild 10 degrees in Berlin. Something colder returning across Scandinavia. This area of low pressure bringing rain and snow across the Baltic states into western Russia. Some quite significant snowfall to come in Moscow on Tuesday, but temperatures just getting above freezing through the afternoon. Still largely dry at this stage across a good part of France. We will see some rain returning to Paris around the middle part of the week. Hopefully nothing too significant. Madrid fine and dry with some sunshine. Cooling off in London, cooling off in Berlin as well. But plenty of pleasantly warm sunshine in Athens.
Giving the classical world a startlingly modern twist is young designer Adam Nathaniel Furman. His digitally created and 3D printed city colourfully reimagines the architecture of Rome and is currently residing in John Soane's kitchen. Oh, blimey. This is a bit of a shock. Hello, Adam. Some people might come in here and say this was all pretty kitsch. What would you say to that?
Absolutely, it is. I was in Rome for 6 months and I went on these epic long walks during which I saw countless, endless amounts of architecture from every century going back 2,000 years. And at the end of the day, would turn them into capriccios, which are little intuitive drawings. They're not actually what I saw, but they're sort of imaginative combinations of everything I saw during the day.
Every destination has new secrets to discover.
Wow, this place is just hewn out of rock.
It's incredible to believe that no one really knew about it.
The Travel Show is your passport to unique places.
People here have found an ingenious way to harness nature.
And unforgettable experiences.
This is so beautiful. Whoa!
See the world differently. The Travel Show on BBC World News.
I've seen things you wouldn't believe.
I seem to be living in a time when all of the tech from my favourite childhood sci-fi films is coming true.
But how do they achieve this? Witchcraft?
Do you feel like you're really hitting the ball?
Paper, scissors.
We're going to be on a Tinder date.
I think that could catch on.
Underneath the reactor.
The future is coming. Watch Click to see it first on BBC World News.
You're watching BBC World News. I'm Babita Sharma. Our top story. One of Japan's largest digital currency exchanges will refund around $500 million of virtual assets lost in a hacking attack. One of the country's biggest exchanges, Coincheck, says it will use its own money to reimburse customers who lost their NEEM cryptocurrency coins on Friday. Thousands rally in support of the Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, who's been released after being detained by police in Moscow. And this story is trending at bbc.com. Right now, the Grammy Awards have got underway in New York. There's expected to be a focus on sexual harassment, an issue much in the entertainment news in recent months, with many wearing a white rose in solidarity of the Me Too movement. You're up to date. Stay with us. More to come here on BBC World News.
Live from Singapore, essential business news as it breaks and a look at the economic news that will shape the day. This is BBC World News and Asia Business Report.
Fed Chief Janet Yellen's swan song as she chairs her last meeting this week. What can we expect on US interest rates? And young tech entrepreneurs in Taipei are ditching the traditional culture of playing it safe. welcome to Asia Business Report. I'm Sharonjeet Lail. Now, it's a key week for the Federal Reserve. Janet Yellen will chair her last meeting of the Federal Open Market Committee, or the FOMC, before handing over the reins to Jerome Powell, who will take over the task of setting U.S. interest rates. Now, the two-day meeting will end on Wednesday, where it's pretty much expected that they'll keep interest rates unchanged. And there's other items on the calendar this week as well. The United States and South Korea, they enter the second round of talks to try to salvage their troubled bilateral trade agreement. That's also on Wednesday. And finally, on Thursday, we will see the titans of the tech world, the likes of Alibaba, Alphabet, Apple, and Amazon. They'll all be posting their earnings results. Well, for more, I spoke to Tuan Huynh, the Chief Investment Officer for Asia Pacific at Deutsche Bank Wealth Management, and started by asking him what he expected from the Fed.
We don't really think there will be any material announcement because, as you rightly said, it's her last meeting as a chairwoman. So hence, they will keep the interest rate unchanged until, of course, she hands over to Powell. And then we would expect the first rate hike this year to happen then in March.
All right. And we know that, of course, in the interim, you've got these the low interest rate environment. Yes, there have been small hikes, but we've also had U.S. tax cuts, and that's been helping corporate sentiment a great deal, driving up the stock markets, for instance. So when do you think these will start having an impact?
So we think the risk is more on the upside, especially on inflation. So if a tax reform comes through much better than expected, we have seen and heard already example like Apple announcing they will move much of their money back to the US, and hence this can cause inflation maybe to move even higher than the Fed would expect, and hence then they might be a little bit more aggressive than the 3 rate hikes which the markets are currently expecting now.
Well, that was Tuan Huynh speaking to me earlier. Now, if you don't own any IKEA furniture yourself, you probably know someone who struggled to put together an IKEA bookshelf with an Allen key. IKEA furniture is pretty much everywhere. The founder of the Swedish furniture giant, Ingvar Kamprad, he's died, though, at age 91. Even Sweden's Prime Minister, Stefan Löfven, has called him a unique entrepreneur who made home furnishing available for the many, not just the few. And for more, we're joined now by our business reporter, Lisha Santarelli, in the studio. Tell us a little bit more about him, Lisha.
Well, Ingvar Kamprad is the man who democratized interior design. He made it accessible and affordable. But he came from very humble beginnings. He was born in a little village in Sweden. His parents were very poor, but he had a very canny business sense. He started off selling matches as well as pencils before starting a mail order service for business goods. He called that company IKEA, and that has since grown to become the world's biggest furniture retailer. It now has more than 400 stores in 49 countries. It employs nearly 200,000 people and has sales of $48 billion a year. So it has grown into this giant behemoth.